Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Spoden. Welcome to today's Entrepreneurship Essentials workshop about competitive analysis. Today we have Phil Leslie, who is a Booth alum from the University of Chicago, and he is the co-founder and chief growth officer at Havoc Shield, which designs cybersecurity programs built specifically for small businesses. Phil is going to be leading us in his presentation today. And if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box and I can ask those on your behalf. And there will also be some time at the end for questions as well. So with that, please take it away, Phil.
Great, thank you, Katie. Can I get just a few thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Everyone good? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so it's Friday, early afternoon. You come here to chat about competitive analysis. I know this is a hardcore group of entrepreneurs if this is how you want to spend your Friday afternoon, so I'm with you. I'm excited. My background when it comes to thinking about competition in early stage companies as an entrepreneur is mostly in the digital and web environment. So a lot of my examples today as we talk through ways to think about the competitive landscape will draw from that kind of technology world. But I think just about any business right now, a brick and mortar business or anything else, probably has some competitor that they can identify that is doing some digital marketing as part of their overall marketing effort. So hopefully the examples will adapt to your personal situation. But I'm super glad to take questions in chat throughout if there's something where you want a little more color on how it might apply more broadly than what I'm talking about. So I'm excited to be here and talk about competition on a Friday afternoon with all of you great entrepreneurs. A little bit of background on how competition has touched my journey. Some of it in ways that are a little more broad than today's topic, but I just thought I would sort of weave the thread of how competition became so important to me throughout all of the different steps of my career. And it starts out with me joining Microsoft in the early 2000s and immediately being trained on what Microsoft versus the United States meant in terms of what you can and can't do on competition, which was not exactly what I was expecting my first day to be there, but competition clearly became a conversation early in my career. After I left Microsoft several years later, I started a company called ProOnGo. We made the first mobile app for turning pictures of receipts into expense reports. And I ended up selling that to a competitor. Now, competitor, very different than the company that I built. I had built a way to solve this expense reporting problem through a mobile app, and they had built a way to solve it through a physical scanner that sat on your desk. But for reasons that we'll kind of get into over the next hour, they were very much a competitor, and then they became acquired. So that became very important to me in terms of the evolution of how a competitive landscape might realign the players. Then I joined a company called Rivs as CEO, and over time rolled up 3 of our competitors and then sold the resulting company in a private equity sale a couple years ago. And again, this thread of competitors, of being aware of the surroundings of the industry landscape and being thoughtful about who has which strategy and what they're executing on, and thinking about potential ways that the industry might evolve, even including mergers and acquisitions, was very impactful on that particular journey. Latest chapter of the journey, co-founding Havoc Shield. We do small business cybersecurity from plan to proof. Still too early for me to tell you exactly how competition shapes the ultimate outcome of that journey, but I'll keep you posted. So in many, many ways, competition and being aware of competition and thinking about the way that it's evolving has been really impactful in my career. And I bet that for many of you, it will as well. So today, some things that I think we could get done together today. Number one, I'd like to talk about jobs to be done as a lens for competitive analysis. There's been a lot of movement towards thinking about the framework jobs to be done in terms of product design, but it also has huge impact to the way that we think about competitive analysis. And I'll share that as just kind of a starting point, a jumping off point for some of the other topics that we're going to hop to. Second, we'll talk about what it means to do a digital marketing teardown. Sounds kind of destructive. It's not destructive at all. Digital marketers that are telling the whole world about the product, the solution, the job that they're solving, and representing their company are by definition putting a ton of information about their positioning and strategy out there for everyone in the world to see, including you as a potential competitor. So this is really the central part of the presentation today, talking about how to use a digital marketing teardown to understand the competitive landscape. And I think you'll be surprised at just how much you can discern about the competitive landscape by doing one of these teardowns. Third, and really the culmination, is empowering you to take action based on these factors. So being very intentional about who you're competing with, who you're not competing with, and setting up a unique selling proposition that genuinely and truly is honestly unique within the landscape that you're competing with, of competitors that you're potentially competing with. So that's the agenda. We can get through all that in a little over an hour. Please send questions in chat along the way, especially if I'm missing some point that you really, really want covered, and we'll either answer it right then or we'll put it on the back burner and get to you during Q&A. But before we move on, let me just say, I'm an operator, not a consultant, not an investor. I do this kind of stuff for a living, just like you all do. I grow and build businesses in these competitive landscapes, and I know the pressures of early stage life. And because of that, we'll make sure that we use mostly free tools today. So I promise that this presentation and the tactics that we present throughout it will fit the budget. Fair? Okay. Jobs to be done as a lens for competitive analysis. So can I get just in maybe in chat or with thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever's easier, how many of you have any exposure to jobs to be done as a framework? You just pop into chat and say yes, or no, or yes, either way, or give me a huge thumbs up.
I'm seeing a mix between yes and no, Phil.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. And that would be actually a wonderful topic for another one of these E2 presentations on a different day, because it's become incredibly powerful for the way that early stage companies think about strategy. But I'll kind of get into why that impacts competitive strategy here in a minute. But first, let's just start with a definition of what competition is. There's a lot of different very wordy explanations, but I love this one, clean rivals. So succinct, so powerful, explains exactly what I feel about what the word competition means. So with that in mind, I'd like to just ask you all this question. Are tap water and Coca-Cola, not Coca-Cola the company, Coca-Cola the specific Coca-Cola drink, that specific drink pictured on the screen, are these two competitors? And I think we've got the flow of the chat kind of slowed down from the last question, so you can pop in with your next response to this. Yeah, go ahead. That's flowing. Awesome. I love the disagreement. One of my favorite things about being a student at Booth when I was there was that the debate was welcomed and encouraged, and that people came to the table with different opinions, and that was really helpful to my learning experience. So we've got a lot of debate here. So let me kind of reveal a perspective that I think is informative. A bunch of years ago, I rode a bike across the country from San Francisco to DC. There were many times that I maybe rode 30, 40, 50 miles, maybe take a little break, grab something to drink. So I just finished a 50-mile bike ride. I need to rehydrate. Our Coca-Cola and tap water competitors. I got to say, at least in my viewpoint, they are not competitors in that situation. I'm looking for something to rehydrate. So this is kind of the jobs to be done lens. The job that I was looking to get done was to rehydrate. I'd just done an exhausting workout. And although I love Coca-Cola, what I really wanted was to rehydrate with nothing but water. Let's take another example. I'd like to make a rum drink. I've got rum, I'd like to make a rum drink. Are Coca-Cola and water competitors in that context? Gosh, unless you just like rum and water, water's probably not a great option for that. I'd say they're not competitors, and they're not competitors because Coca-Cola is, I assume for most of us, the clear winner in that situation. Okay, but moving on to a third example, you're eating a spicy Mexican themed lunch, and the waiter or waitress asks, what would you like to drink? Are tap water and Coca-Cola competitors? I think they are. I think a variety of people might select tap water, a variety of people might select Coca-Cola, and the job to be done of having something refreshing to drink with it. There are differing opinions about what might be the best option. So that's a lens on job to be done. And that impacts a lot about how I think about setting up a contest between rivals, because it's only a contest between rivals if we're seeking to do the same job. If there's something different about the job that I'm setting up my company to do and the job that someone else is setting it up to do, for example, if I'm selling just to small businesses and someone else is setting up a company to just sell to enterprises, even if we're both building software that helps with cybersecurity, if we're selling into totally different types of organizations that don't overlap, then we are not competitors. And that's an important fundamental as we get into the next step of this conversation, which gets deeper into what it means to do a digital marketing teardown to evaluate the way that other companies are either directly competing or not competing with yours. Okay, so far so good. Hasn't been a ton of questions in chat so far, and that's fine. But as we go through the digital marketing teardown, feel free to post things in chat. If there's anything that doesn't make sense, I would love to hear from you during that, rather than hearing after the presentation that we missed something big. So feel free to do that. Okay, so digital marketing, question from Juan Pablo, will the slides be shared? I assume that we can do that. I'll relay them to Katie. Katie, you'll be able to share them out, right?
Yes, I can.
Super, okay. So competitive teardown. So back in my days of working for Microsoft in some of their devices groups, a standard thing that you would do when you were looking at the way that a competitor was operating was you would get some of their devices and you'd tear them to shreds and see what was inside. What kind of CPU, what kind of circuitry, what kind of components? Are they the same ones that we use? Are they different? How are they different? And that's where the word, at least in my experience, that's where the word competitive teardown originated in my career, in my life. That's where I first heard of it. A digital marketing teardown is actually in a lot of ways easier. It's cheaper. It's basically free if you're careful about the tools that you use. And as we said at the top, digital marketers by definition motivate, tell the whole world about what types of people most benefit from the product or service that they're creating. Now that doesn't mean that it's not hard work to do a digital marketing teardown, but it does mean that there's a tremendous amount of publicly available information available for free about the companies that you may perceive as being competitors that will allow you to determine whether you are or aren't competing with them and on what dimensions. So that's what I mean by a digital marketing teardown. There's a pretty common framework when you think about the way that digital marketers communicate, and I can take some questions in chat if this is totally unfamiliar to you, but there's sort of a framework that talks about owned media, earned media, and paid media as being three of the main ways that marketers communicate with the world about their company. Owned is things like the copy on your website, whatever you put on your website, on your social media channels, things that you fully control, that you're not fundamentally paying someone to help get the message out. Earned is generally if someone just voluntarily writes something about your company, perhaps a unsolicited review, or perhaps a journalist that's writing an article that ends up highlighting your company, and that type of thing. Not a situation where you're compensating a journalist or compensating someone to do a review, but someone that just chooses to speak about your company because of the experience they've had with it. And paid is pretty simple. Buying ads, paying people to do things, paying for the opportunity to sponsor a conference or a virtual event, etc. So these three lenses will help us. These three lenses will help us think about the different types of communication that we might want to evaluate from companies that we believe are potentially competitors. Question from Alex is an example of the overlap between all three categories. Alex, I would say that these categories are blurring in really interesting ways. And I'll try to think of a good example here, but the difference between owned and earned, for example, owned versus earned, if I nudge a customer and ask them to, that I know is a happy customer, and ask them to write a review for me, and they know that they might get a $10 Starbucks gift card out of it, that probably flips over to paid instead of earned. But yeah, there's some fuzzy areas in between the two, and I'll try to come up with some examples as we go throughout here. Let's talk about signal quality. We're about to do a digital marketing teardown, and I want to talk briefly about how strong of a signal you'll be able to pick up from these different types of communications that digital marketers do. In terms of owned media, these are digital marketers that are fundamentally fully controlling the message that they're describing about their product or service. And so the fidelity is very, very high in terms of the things that they say being aligned with what the company is actually trying to do, because they fully control it. So I take that as a very, very strong signal. If there's something that's above the fold on the main page of their website, and it says that they pursue large enterprises, it's a pretty darn good bet that that's who they pursue. Earned is a little bit less certain in terms of signal quality. In its true definition, earned media could be a journalist that's writing something about your industry that happens to include their perception about what you do in it. And although that might be that journalist's perception, it doesn't necessarily map with the company's strategy. Hopefully it does. Great digital marketers are good at influencing that, but it doesn't necessarily align as well as if it was coming straight out of the mouth of the digital marketer at the company. And lastly, paid correlates extremely highly with the way that companies are intentionally positioning themselves, because not only did the words come out of their mouth, but they're paying for it to do it. And if it was important enough to pay for, you presume that in most cases that it was thoughtful in terms of what the message would be. Okay, a couple questions to catch up on here. I see David and Sachin. Let me get both of those. Question from Sachin in terms of ethics. I think the question is maybe about paid digital marketing strategy, and the question of whether that's ethical. Okay, yeah, and maybe super clearly, but the most common form of paid digital marketing is, or one of the most popular forms, is buying Google ads. And although I'd be totally open to some back and forth on what your concerns would be on that front, I personally don't consider that unethical at all. Question from David, where some journalistic coverage occurs alongside a paid media spend, where social traffic drives back to the site. Okay, I think that was a response to the question about overlap between the categories. Thanks, David, appreciate that. Okay, so let's do a digital marketing teardown. So this is really the next big part of this presentation is really designed to make it, to give you a toolbox that you can use to take apart your competitive landscape for free over the course of a few hours and pop out with a really crisp view of the way that your competitors are positioning themselves, for the purpose of then reflecting on whether the way you're positioning your company is putting you head to head against an existing entrant, which is fine as long as you know it and as long as you're planning for it, or whether it's putting you out there in some green space where there aren't other competitors, which is also possibly very fruitful for you as well, or potentially detrimental to you if that green space is there intentionally because it turns out to not be a profitable space. But in any case, that awareness around what the competitive landscape looks like is crucial to your ability to operate your business. I need an example of a space to make this really practical. Like I said, I'm an operator. I'm going to try to make this super practical by tearing down an actual industry that most of us have in some way, shape, or form interacted with. And just for the purposes of making this practical, a space that I thought we would use today is a space called Applicant Tracking Systems. I know that's acronyms, really geeky, all of that, but anyone that has applied for a job online where they had to upload a resume, fill out some information about themselves and submit it for consideration has used an applicant tracking system. That's what that is. And so as we do this industry teardown, we're going to tear down that space as an example to keep it really practical, so that we're not just talking theoretical today. I should pause at this moment because the rest of the examples all tie out to this analysis of applicant tracking systems. So let me just pause and ask if anyone has a question about what that is, because the rest of the examples point back to that so that we can keep them practical. Okay, cool. So let's tear down that space. Let's start with owned media. So owned media, the things that we'll tear down are how the companies describe themselves, how Google describes their content. You know, this one's kind of interesting. Some people would describe this second item as not being owned media, that maybe it shouldn't be categorized that way since it's coming out of Google. My personal viewpoint is that since Google's applying an algorithm to analyze the content of your website and marketing materials, and that it's not a human judgment thing, that I consider it owned, but there's certainly room for debate on that. Number 3, we'll talk about how companies disclose, what they disclose about their target customers, both in terms of the companies that they are selling to, the job titles of the people that they are specifically selling to in those companies, and lastly, what they disclose about price. Okay, so owned media. Let's begin the marketing teardown, digital marketing teardown, how they describe themselves. All right, so this will be a warm up. At most of the parts of this teardown, I'll point you to very specific tools that you can try that are either free or free trial, none of which I have any kind of stake in, but just all things that I've used as a scrappy entrepreneur over the years. But we'll start out with one that's really easy, a warm up. So if you want to think about how companies describe themselves, a really easy place to start is to grab the description that's embedded in their website. Just about every website has one. Search engines often use it as the little blurb below the link that you might click on if you found that page. And grabbing a bunch of competitors in a space and looking at their descriptions is surprisingly revealing in terms of how those competitors think about their position in the market. So just throughout the presentation and in the follow-up slides, there are links to the tools for everything that I described in this in the digital marketing teardown. So this particular one, and it's not important that you remember the specific names of the applicant tracking systems that we described. This is all to build up the concept of things that you can learn by using these different teardown techniques. These are literally the descriptions that came off of each of those websites. And I want to point out just a few things that we're already gleaning just by doing that quick level of analysis. So this one, Bullhorn, says it is specifically for staffing firms. So for anyone that hasn't been involved in kind of that world of recruiting, there's a distinction between companies that have a full-time talent acquisition team that manage the recruiting process versus companies that augment that with an outsourced vendor that helps them with staffing and recruiting. This Bullhorn one is specifically for those staffing firms, or so it seems from the description. This iSIMS one just describes it as a recruiting platform. JobVite actually discloses that they have thousands of companies that they serve. So kind of alarm bells are going off for me that this might be one that serves mostly small businesses, but we'll see how this evolves. Workable differentiates by helping you find candidates, not just managing the application process. Workable does that. And Workday, it's interesting. Even though the 6 entrants that we've selected here are ones that I took straight off of a list of applicant tracking systems, they're not positioning themselves as an applicant tracking system at all. It's about building your business in a way that's much broader than that. So I'm going to start building up as we go through, and that was just our warm up little tool and tactic. We'll start building up this cheat sheet of what we've learned of each of these competitors during this teardown. Now, this information is messy and probably gets messier throughout this talk because competitors aren't teeing it up in a way that makes it necessarily easy for you to understand everything about their strategy. That's not their goal. They're doing it in a way that they think reaches their target audience in a way that is compelling to them. So it gets a little chaotic. We won't have a clean analysis. We have insight on every single dimension with every single competitor, but we'll keep building up our cheat sheet as we go. Okay, so that was our warm up. Now let's move on to how Google describes their content. Okay, anyone use the keyword planner to kind of look at a competitor before? Can I get any yeses if there's anyone in chat that has used this before? I'm just kind of curious if this is a review for many of you or if it's new. Mostly no so far. A few people that are yes. Any of you that are yes, feel free, as I described the way that I use it, if you've got some additional take on it, please feel free to add it to chat and we'll discuss it. So, Google's got a lot of expertise in terms of crawling sites and looking at the content on it and figuring out and ascribing meaning to that content. And so a shortcut that you can do instead of pouring through every page of a website that one of your possible competitors has and reading all the content and evaluating it is to have Google crawl it and evaluate what keywords they would recommend that company use for search optimization and advertisement. Question in the chat is, are these kind of tools applicable to B2B marketing? Absolutely, very applicable. I do mostly B2B and I use it heavily, but really this keyword planner will crawl any website, consumer, anything. So I think it's a broad applicability. But really the way that you do this on Google Ads Keyword Planner is you can have it evaluate an entire site. You should probably exclude the keyword of the company's name because otherwise a lot of the keywords it suggests will have that company's name in it. And that's fine, but that won't give you insight. That won't give you the insight we're looking for here. And it'll suggest what keywords are most relevant that company might consider using in their paid ad campaigns. So this is really great free insight. All you need is a Google Ads account. You might have to put in a credit card, but I don't think you have to spend anything in order to get access to it. And I've used this for a lot of years for this type of purchase. So let's look at what we find out about these entrants by using this particular tool in the teardown strategy. So Google will select a ton of different keywords that they think are relevant to each of these sites, but I've just picked the top, I guess 9 for each of them here, and just pulling out some examples of keywords that I found insightful that it suggested. So just by looking at the Bullhorn site, it's becoming increasingly clear that Google thinks it's for executive recruiting software agencies. It's becoming increasingly clear that iCIMS sells directly to HR teams. It's becoming clear that JobBite's unique angle on applicant tracking systems is that they've gotten a special focus on candidate engagement, candidate experience. You don't see that in any of these other sites in these top keywords. So that's insightful about the way that they compete. Workable, I found it really interesting that out of the top 9 keywords that Google suggests for them, that 4 of them have the word free in it. So it's not quite clear to me whether there is something that's really free about Workable for the long term, but that must be a really significant part of some of the language on that website for 4 out of these 9 top keywords to have that. Workday pops out a level, and instead of talking about talent acquisition or recruiters, it talks all about human capital management, which is a much broader topic that includes things like performance management, compensation, training, all of these different things in addition to talent acquisitions. That's really informative. And they also use these signals that are related to the coverage they have from Gartner that kind of adds a bunch of enterprise level credibility. So those are some of the things that we found out. And I'll tell you what really stuns me about this. When I ran this analysis, I thought, I'm going to get some insights into the sort of differences in the products between these companies. And it's going to be insightful on that dimension, but it actually turned out to be a lot more than that. And as I was reading those keywords, what occurred to me is that we've just learned a ton about the org chart of how these companies sell. and I'll share exactly what I mean by that. So we talked about Workday marketing human capital management software. That is not something that you sell to the outsourced staffing partner or the VP of talent acquisition. That's all the way up here at the chief human resources officer, and maybe even up to the CEO and the whole C-suite. So just from that keyword, you can kind of, and none of this is perfect, but there's a very, very strong signal in those keywords that they're not just a tool related to recruiting or job posting, or they're not just a tool that they sell to outsourced recruiting agencies. They're selling human capital management software, and that category of offering is something that's sold at the chief human resource officer level. So I was kind of stunned to think about the fact that just by doing that quick keyword analysis, like that we could start to deduce in an org chart where these companies are selling to. Several of the others talk about recruiter software, talent acquisition, employee hiring software, and those kind of feel like keywords that are targeted at companies where they're selling to the VP of talent acquisition or the head of talent acquisition, or in a smaller company, if there's only one talent acquisition person, to that person. But they're keywords that relate specifically to talent acquisition and recruiting. And then you saw Bullhorn talking very specifically about software staffing agencies, so to outsource partners. So I hope we're already starting, and we've got a bunch more to go here, but I hope we're already starting to form this viewpoint that by doing these digital marketing teardowns, you can very quickly get a sense for, I don't think even after this early stage, I don't think anyone would look at this and say, hey, Workday and Bullhorn are direct competitors. They're hops away from each other on the org chart. They're selling to different companies, job titles that aren't even, that are hops away from each other in terms of formal authority, et cetera. So let's keep going. Let's see what else we can find out. But I was kind of stunned that just that quick analysis already pulled us towards distinctions in job titles of who these companies sell to. Okay, so just continuing to build up the cheat sheet here. And really the ultimate culmination of this is to have a cheat sheet that we look at and say, this is a great summary of the competitive landscape. So we'll just kind of keep adding to this over time. Okay, let's move on to what they disclose about their target customers. So evaluating the competitive landscape, if you had a list of customers that each of your would-be competitors have, that would probably be very revealing about whether those are the same type of customers that you're selling to, in which case maybe you are in head-to-head competition, or if those customers appear to be from a totally different segment from who you prefer to sell to, then maybe you're not competitors at all, even though you're building a product that might, in terms of its title, have a similar name. So keeping it really easy here. When I do this kind of tear down in any company that I'm involved in, I start with things like this, a well-targeted Google search, where I then kind of scrub the results and keep track of all the customers that I'm able to discern as being customers of that particular competitor. So, it's interesting. I know a lot of companies that spend big dollars evaluating the competitive landscape, but for me, it just feels much more accessible to start with something like this and see how far I get in terms of being able to understand the landscape using these free type of tools. And turns out that in this particular case, you get pretty far. So I've only got one big blank here for a company called Workable, but the other ones, I've got a pretty dang good idea about what kind of companies they sell to. And even some familiar names like Workday selling to General Electric and Hewlett Packard, and Bullhorn selling to companies that look like recruitment consulting firms, and iSIM selling to some companies that feel sort of middle market-ish. So, even this kind of simple analysis can start to gather this intel for you. And if you were entering this space and you had this sheet right in front of you, you would be able to very, very quickly deduce which of these companies feel like they are potentially competitors to the way that you're entering the market versus those that totally aren't. It kind of bugged me that I had a blank for Workable, so I had to go a click deeper to figure out what's going on there. I don't know if you've used Wolfram Alpha before, but one thing that happens in the software industry is, especially in the SaaS industry, I'll try to make this one of the only tangents about something that's unique to that space, but sometimes you'll see companies that give a dedicated subdomain to each customer, and Wolfram Alpha will really help you dig into that. So, to see if Workable did that same technique. Yes, they did, and that was kind of a good way to get a customer list of people that rely on Workable. So there we go. And so it turns out that Workable, if you dig into these, serves a bunch of relatively early stage tech savvy organizations. And oh, there's an even very familiar one there. Maybe that's not so early stage anymore. 1871's awesome. Question from, and I'll try to pronounce this correctly, Shazia, what are the subdomains used for? So, again, this might be a tangent specific to B2B SaaS, but if you're in a middle market or enterprise company and you rely on some external website as part of your workflow, sometimes you'll say, hey, I don't want to just sign in to workable.com. I want to sign in to 1871.workable.com or springbot.workable.com or whatever it is. I'm not sure the rationale behind that actually has as much substance to it as people would think, but that's kind of a tradition that's happened in that space. Question about, does this work for B2C as well? I think, if you're going after B2C, like these might not be the exact words in the search, but there's going to be some evidence that's discoverable about what customers a company has. And I would just suggest starting with the free tools like a well-crafted Google search to get there. You might have to go a little bit more manual in reviewing like what particular B2C, in a B2C context, what those specific customers said about the solution or the company. But absolutely, well-crafted Google search can get you pretty far on that. Okay. So we're starting to get a pretty good hypothesis about the target companies that each of these 6 market entrants pursue. And that's really, really helpful, because if you were entering this space and you were selling to tech-savvy small businesses, you would know that this is one of the competitors that you really, really need to care about and keep an eye on. Whereas you probably don't need to care very much about Workday unless you're concerned that they might pivot into the tech-savvy small businesses. So we're starting to really accumulate a lot of knowledge about these entrants. Let's just quickly look at price. So having a little bit of a framework in mind for how people price in sort of the industry that you're in this particular industry, there's a big trend towards that companies selling to small businesses will often disclose their price and have kind of a self-service checkout process, whereas companies that are selling to larger organizations might be really opaque, and it might be like a button that takes you to a meeting with a sales representative or scheduling a meeting. So dig into that. In this particular space, they're exactly the 2 companies that we would expect from our prior analysis that disclose pricing on their website. There's one that talks about its different packages but doesn't disclose pricing, so that's kind of a hybrid. And the rest of them are a little bit more reserved about talking about packaging and pricing, leading that directly into a more traditional sales process. Okay, so it's starting to come together here. And I know this feels like a lot, but the point here is that the analysis that we're walking through, by the time we get to the end of it, I spent maybe 2 or 3 hours doing it. And if I was entering this particular space, by the time we're able to show you the full output of the digital marketing teardown, you'll look at it and I hope, look at it and say, gosh, if I spent 2 or 3 hours and I got this level of insight about other companies that operate in this space, I'd be dramatically better off in terms of forming my own competitive strategy. So that's the goal. So I'll just say that in this little breather here before we carry on with more of the teardown. Okay, let's talk about additional teardowns that you could do. And this should say, yeah, this is correct. Owned media additional teardown. So job descriptions. Looking at the job descriptions that companies post, if they're looking for someone that has a small business sales expertise or a large enterprise sales expertise, that's a good signal of where they're headed. If they're looking for people that have expertise in healthcare, that's a good indication that they're building a healthcare focus in their business. whatever they're saying in their job descriptions is one of the greatest leading indicators of where that company is headed next, especially if you're able to kind of sleuth around on LinkedIn and discern that they haven't had someone in that role before, that this is a net new role in their company. And if it turns out to be focused on a segment of the market that that they don't appear to be operating in currently, this is one of the very, very best leading indicators of where they're going with their digital marketing and with their strategy altogether. Same thought about background of recent hires. If they've just hired a chief revenue officer and that person's background is 100% about selling into the aviation industry, there's a good chance that that entrant is going to do something in the aviation industry. It's not quite as good of a leading indicator as the job descriptions because it tends to be just slightly old news by a few weeks or a month by the time you notice it. Looking at the company's presence on third-party marketplaces and partner programs. You can also go deeper into the website teardown, looking at headings, subheadings, sub-subheadings. You could probably, if you narrowed it down to a couple competitors that you were most concerned about, you could probably reconstruct their marketing messaging framework in a pretty decent way by doing that type of teardown. Also in terms of owned media, social media posts, followers, activity level, etc. Okay, so anyway, the point is, I gave you kind of a sampling of what you can do on owned media, digital teardowns, but there's a ton more that you can do. And I think the sky's the limit in terms of how far you can get on this for free, for just your time, if you really need to dig into the competitive landscape. Any questions on owned media before we flip to paid media? Because we're going to do a similar teardown on paid media, different tools and techniques, but we're flipping to paid here. Any questions on owned before we do that? I'm just going to enjoy my Coca-Cola, not a water here before I hope there's someone from Coca-Cola on this call so I can get sponsorship. All right. Digital marketing teardown of paid media. Can I get some feedback in chat? Just I don't really know how mainstream this is for all of you, but does anyone know or use ahrefs.com for analysis of search terms, either paid or unpaid? Gotcha. Mostly no, a few yeses, and that's fine. So this is, at least in my experience, again, I've got no stake in any of these, but this is, in the last 10 years of kind of focusing on this is one of the very best sites for keyword analysis. And even though we're talking about it in terms of paid ads in this paid media section, it's also great for SEO analysis. They have a 7-day free trial running right now, I think. You know, if you want to check it out and do some analysis, you can probably get most of that done in that time frame. So let's talk about what we can do to analyze paid Google ads. And I'm just for now, I'm going to focus just on the ones where it's where someone's optimizing around having an ad shown for a specific search term. Like this one for Bullhorn happens to be around an ad that's shown if someone searches for recruitment database software. I know there's a lot of different kinds of ads that you can do, but we're just going to focus on those keyword oriented ads for now. Question from Zach. Can we share the slides? Not a problem. Glad to do it. Katie will take care of that at the end. We'll get that done for you. All right. So, you know, a kind of thing that in this particular digital marketing teardown, some of the things that we can discern just by grabbing the lists of keywords that each of these companies advertise on. And the spreadsheet that is shown on this slide is, I guess, the first 39 rows of one that was like 2,500 rows long. But you can start to think about overlap where, you know, for example, JobVite and Workable are both advertising on the key phrase Google Applicant Tracking System and also on Best ATS for Small Businesses. And so, you know, if JobVite and Workable are both duking it out for ad coverage on the search term Best ATS for Small Business, usually, like when you think about advertising and you think about kind of an auction process where multiple companies are competing to serve an ad on the same word, you don't like intentionally get into those kinds of auction processes as an ad buyer unless you have to, because the cost is going to get driven up. So it's a pretty decent signal that these keywords are important to them and that JobBite and Workable are going head to head on some of these small business items. Question from Juan Pablo: how to get a site to the top results of Google on these 3 types of ads? Yeah, I mean, it's pay to play, you know, like if you're willing to set your all of your settings in a way that cranks up your ad spend on any of these words, you can pretty much definitely be at the top most of the time if you're willing to pay for it. I think maybe your question also crosses into SEO, where you're optimizing to get high on the search result page without payment as well. That's an additional important strategy too. Okay, so competitive landscape wise, some of the first things that I look at is which companies have an intersection between each other in terms of the keywords they're competing for. So it just turns out that in this particular case, there's a lot of overlap between Workable and iSIMS, a fair amount of overlap between Workable and JobBite, and a little bit of other overlap elsewhere. I'll also point out that this Zoho Recruit one basically does very little advertising at all. So we just kind of come up with 0 in terms of insight from them. But again, we're building our context, especially in terms of the overlapped key phrases that, boy, if these 2 companies both care about best ATS for small business and Google Applicant Tracking System, which was a small business oriented offering, that's a pretty good signal that those companies care about small business. Second thing I usually look at is the top uncontested ads that people or key phrases that people are targeting with their ads. And one of the things that just totally stunned me about this is that we were talking earlier in our digital marketing teardown that Workday is targeting something that's much, much broader than just an applicant tracking system, that they're positioning themselves as a human capital management system. I thought it was fascinating that when I looked at the top keywords that they're investing the most in, that there was scarcely a mention of applicant tracking systems at all. So don't yet know what to make of this, but I thought it was fascinating that of the 6 entrants that we're analyzing, their eye doesn't appear to be so squarely on that applicant tracking system market. They've got their eye on kind of a broader game plan. And that's super useful to know as a competitor, that you've got some specific competitors that are totally focused on exactly the space that you are as well, and some that have their eye on a broader picture or a more narrow picture. And that really helps form the opportunity ahead of you as a company. Okay, so just adding to our list here, I'm just going to cruise through this. We'll show you the full notes list for each of these 6 competitors when we're near the end here. Additional teardowns that we don't have time, I would love to do here, but we won't have time in this presentation. Looking at sponsorships like webinars, virtual conferences, industry associations, events. I seriously hope that this is something that happens again by the end of 2021. Really hope. But these are all things where it's so readily available to do a digital marketing teardown to figure out who sponsored what and when. Sponsored social posts. We didn't get into display ads, like various kinds of banners and image related ads, the content and context of those. Promotional guest posts where companies are building, often building links back to their site by doing guest posts on other sites that are paid, retargeted ads, etc. So there's a ton more that you can do for free to analyze the competitive landscape in terms of what your competitors are doing with paid media. So just don't have time to do it all here. Questions about paid media before we move on to earned. I really wish we had time to go through some of these additional tactics that I just covered. We're not going to have enough time. So, and any questions on the topic so far before we hop into earned? Okay.
So Elizabeth has a question. Do you mind sharing how you found the top keywords that are uncontested?
Yeah, totally. Thank you. I'm so glad you asked. So I'll flip back here. Okay, so I mentioned that site ahrefs.com, and basically what I do, my tactic there is for each competitor, I go and get a list of the keywords that they're advertising on. And candidly, I just drag those into tabs in Excel and just use a few Excel formulas to figure out which ones of them are non-overlapping. Like literally taking a list of the keywords that Workday is advertising on and using some VLOOKUPs to figure out if any of the other competitors are advertising on the same. I know there's a lot of booth people on this call. Many of you are better at spreadsheets than I am, so a lot of you guys will ace this. But that's what I do. And at least on Ahrefs, the way that they let you gather the key phrases that competitors are advertising on, they come out in a ranked way where you get a sense for which key phrases that competitor is doing the most advertising on, all the way down to the least. So you've got the raw info, and this community of U of C and booth people can probably knock that analysis out of the park even better than I can, but that's how I do it. Awesome. Let me go back here. All right, earned media. Well, I got to tell you on earned media, so uncompensated reviews, unpaid media mention, unpaid social comments and interactions, it is getting very, very hard to tell what's really earned versus paid. Extremely hard. Just taking the review sites as an example, there's an awesome, outstanding site that's based in Chicago. There's a wonderful job at this, but there's some review sites where you look at the reviews and you just instantly think that these are companies that paid one of their customers, gave them a couple $100 gift certificate to Amazon to write a friendly review, or someone else. And it's getting so hard to figure out what's real and what's earned versus what's paid on these. Same thing with media mentions. Same thing with social interactions. You got people using things like pods on LinkedIn to drive up the number of likes and comments on their posts, and it's difficult. So I actually candidly have less advice for you in this talk about doing a digital marketing teardown for earned media than I do about either owned or paid. But I'll give you just a couple kind of quick pointers to some things to look at. So two of the things that I do a lot of are new links that appear that are pointing at a competitor. It's pretty easy to set up alerts that let you know when one of your competitors has a new link pointing to their website from some third party. There is a lot of noise in that, right? Like not every new link that appears has any kind of substantial intentional marketing behind it. But by kind of scrolling through those and taking a peek occasionally, you'll be kind of one of the first to know when your competitor is getting a lot of in-media mentions around some part of their offering. Perhaps your competitor launches a new feature or benefit, and you start to see backlinks that point to that page on your competitor's site. And if you know that sooner rather than later, you're well equipped to look at those and kind of evaluate what the trend is for that competitor and whether it's a trend that's concerning to you. So that's one way to keep an eye out for earned media. Sometimes you'll find things in there that are paid or owned, but at least it's a way to get some type of alert. I'm also a heavy user of Google Alerts, having them alert when there's a web page that pops up with a particular keyword. You might have to get more specific than just the competitor's name, but hey, it's free to set up alerts. And if you're good with email filters in Gmail or whatever you use, you can probably make it manageable in some way. So those are some just initial tips on earned media. I really have less to say about that than I would have had to say a couple of years ago, because the line is blurring in a way that makes it really tough to tell the difference between paid and earned. So it's an area I'm personally working on. I'd love tips if there's anyone in the audience that has additional ideas for monitoring specifically earned media. That'd be exciting. Okay, so we've done owned, we've done earned, we've done paid. And now it's time to look at what we've discovered about this particular market over the course of, in our conversation here about 40 minutes, but really the total analysis took me maybe 2 or 3 hours to pull together. So here's what we know about these 6 companies, just from doing some clever work on crawling websites, having Google inspect web content to discern relevant keywords, using Ahrefs, inspecting the descriptions on the websites. This is everything that we've found out about these companies. And we learned a ton about product pricing, the target buyer that we hypothesized they're going after, the target company size that we hypothesized they're going after. In a few cases, we learned a little bit about their scale in terms of how many customers they have. We learned a lot about which ones are focused narrowly on the exact category that we set to learn about, applicant tracking systems, versus which ones are more broad and which ones have a niche focus. And I'll grant you that there are a few question marks in here that we weren't able to turn over in this initial analysis. But this is a pretty dang good start at understanding this particular competitive landscape by just using a few free tools and a little bit of elbow grease to learn about them. So with that in hand, now for me is kind of the moment where it flips from being the legwork of gathering data to being the legwork of doing analysis on that. And so I think about this, and let me just be the first to admit, this is all imperfect. This is all based on data that we've just gathered from a few publicly available sources. But given what I know about this particular industry from some of my prior work experience, it turns out to be very directionally correct. There's a question in chat from iPhone to everyone that says, do you use any particular sites for finding databases to drive insights? I'm pretty data driven. So, at least through one lens on that question, I mean, I would consider Ahrefs to be an example of something that is driven by some big database on the back end. But if you clarify your question a little further to help me understand more about what you're really getting at, I'll be glad to take another shot at it. But in any case, sort of transitioning from gathering all the data to doing analysis of it, I like to kind of lay out some of these factors where I've gathered enough insight to be able to sort of plot the different market entrants. I like to kind of lay it out kind of like this, to think about, it's not so fine-grained as to say that iCIMS is targeting 1,000 to 3,000 person companies. It's not that fine-grained, but it's directionally, I think, very convincing to say that Workday is hanging out here targeting the enterprises, that Workable and Zoho are targeting small businesses, and that iCIMS and JobVite have some bigger span here. Again, not perfect, but directionally, I think really informative and a good shot at it for a couple hours of work. Do the same thing on a couple other examples here, but I'll leave. I just want to do enough to illustrate the techniques that I use for doing the digital marketing teardown. I'm not doing like an exhaustive one here, but as an example here, thinking about the suite breadth, like the providers like Workday that are so broad that they, in some situations, don't even mention recruitment or talent acquisition, versus ones that are very, very focused on it, like Bullhorn. Like to plot those out, and I'll do just one more here. For the ones that sell into middle market or enterprise, the target buyer profile, it's very, very clear to me that Workday is using language intended to appeal to chief human resources officers. And it's very, very clear to me that iCIMS and JobVite are using key phrases that would resonate with a VP of talent. So I'll kind of leave it to you to do analysis like this in your space, but I'm just trying to give you sort of a framework that if you set out to do something like this in your space, and if you kind of modeled it the way that we've done this analysis, I think you'll pop out the other end with some really insightful things about the way your competitors are strategically operating, and that can inform either whether you are going to go head to head with them or not, or whether you're going to revise your strategy. And it's certainly a multi-period game. So strategy is dynamic, and keeping your finger on the pulse of what your competitors are doing in digital marketing is a great input into that dynamic strategy. Okay, let's flip to taking action. So here's the way I think about it. Those charts that we showed over the last few slides, if you wanted to weave your way through them and find some green space, totally fine, totally get it. But there are totally valid reasons for going head to head with competitors. There's valid reasons for following in the footsteps of a competitor, but changing one key thing that they didn't get right. There's a lot of different strategies here. So let me just kind of review some of the things that that companies might do, that your companies might do if you were to have this type of insight about your space. So you could find uncontested ground. It's the hardest in very, very established markets, but most of us launching companies on this call are probably going after spaces where there's a little bit of greenfield left. But beware that it may be uncontested ground for a reason. There may be a reason why all of these smart people running smart companies are choosing to leave a particular piece of uncontested space. There may be a valid reason. It might be totally unprofitable. It might be too hard to sell into. Might have too much regulatory burden. Whatever it is, there could be a reason for it. Maybe you end up deciding to compete head-to-head with an incumbent after evaluating and feeling like now that you understand their position, you can do it better than them. And that's totally fine. Careful on the balance sheet a little bit. If you're going against a big company and you've got a lighter balance sheet, make sure you've got what it takes to enter into that, and be a little bit concerned about retaliation. Just make sure that you're prepared for that. And certainly choose to be a fast follower, following someone else's strategy, but just fixing one thing that they did wrong or a couple things they did wrong. Just make sure that your unique twist is sustainable. And hey, I know this is a talk about competitive analysis and digital teardowns, but I've met entrepreneurs that say, I just don't care what my competitors are doing. I'm doing my thing. I'm focusing on doing right by my customers, and that's what I'm going to do. And I totally respect that, but I will ask for just a little bit of leniency in that viewpoint to say that awareness is at least a minimum, at least knowing what your competitors are doing. Not saying that, if this is your viewpoint and you have this high degree of confidence that you're serving your customers and it's growing and it's working, that is great. But just a little bit of awareness, I think, will help you manage the risk that over time your competitors will evolve in a way that ends up stepping on your toes. This is a multi-period game. Unfortunately, nothing worth doing is easy. I think this quote has been attributed to a million different people over time. Don't know who said it first, but at least with this awareness of the competitive landscape, you'll be able to make informed decisions about what you want to do, what your unique take on it is. Okay, last thing before a little bit of discussion or Q&A, revisiting our opener. So, Phil rides across the country from San Francisco to DC. After 50 miles, stops for a break, refreshing break. Is tap water versus Coca-Cola, are they competitors? I really don't think so in that lens, not for me. Workday, is listed on a page that talks about them being an applicant tracking system. So is Bullhorn. Does that mean Workday and Bullhorn are competitors? Totally don't think so. Going after totally different sizes of organizations, different people, different use cases, not competitors at all. Bullhorn shouldn't worry at all about what Workday is doing or vice versa, unless in a strategic multi-period game, they evolve their strategies in a way that gets closer to each other. That is all of the competitive analysis, digital marketing teardown that I want to try to jam into your heads over the course of an hour here on a Friday afternoon. I would super love to take any questions or discussions. This is a topic I care a lot about, and you can teach me something new that I didn't know, or we can talk about some question you've got. All of that is fair game. Okay, so I'm kind of trying to, and it's fine if you want to pop into audio and ask a question too, that's fine. Let me try to keep up with chat here. Lots of things here. Okay, Alex. So any tips on how to identify competitors, particularly competing business units, product services that are not necessarily core business offerings? Alex, I'm gonna give the digital marketer's answer to this, which might be a narrow view on it, but hopefully it's a starting point for you. If you totally don't have a sense for who the competitors are in a particular space where you're operating a business, a starting point that would give you a pretty darn good list is to gather the Google keywords that they suggest for your particular site, for your company, and then to see who else is playing ball with those particular keywords, either ranking high for them on organic search or paying for ads. I know that's a narrow Google or a narrow digital marketing view on it, but that's at least a starting point. I think most people as they evolve in operating their companies, I think most people develop a pretty keen sense of kind of the inventory of companies that play in or around their space, but that could maybe bootstrap it for you at least.
Phil, I noticed Nick Adams has his hand raised. Nick, if you want to ask your question.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciated the talk there, Phil. It seems like you do a lot of work just gathering data. A lot of it is really just how quickly can you gather data from all these different points. What other sort of systems do you use, or do you use any other products that help you in that data gathering process that helps you get to these conclusions quicker?
Yeah, so for me, I tend to do this very, very heavily at the outset of a new venture. Mm-hmm. And then for me, you know, candidly, even though, believe me, I love competitive analysis, it doesn't end up being that Phil spends 3 hours a week every week doing this. It's more like I spend a bunch of time maybe when I'm beginning to form an entity, and then I set up my alerts just right so that I'm getting notified of activity that Google's finding or that Ahrefs is finding. And honestly, I'm a little bit more reactive in most of the month, but then maybe in about 1 month increments, I do a little bit deeper dive to see what's changed. So this may not be super efficient, but it's what's worked for me in terms of doing a hunk of work at the beginning to get a sense of the market and then to get some alerts over time. Any thoughts or suggestions of what you've seen work, Nick?
Well, for me, I'm kind of looking at it from an entrepreneurial lens. Like, would it be helpful for you to have some sort of dashboard that can help you aggregate all of these different Google alerts or Ahrefs alerts, whatever it is that might be coming in over time, that can be responsive and all aggregated in one area, so that you can keep that competitive lens from a more macro level on a simple dashboard, rather than having to piece together information coming in from disparate sources.
Yeah, Nick, if you build that, please call me. I'd be interested. I'd like to learn more about what could evolve from that. When I think about the pain that I experienced gathering all this and doing all this analysis from these different sources, it's not like a burning problem for me. In other words, I don't feel too bad about spending 2 or 3 hours at one point, and then maybe again in a couple months. But there's no doubt that there must be a more effective way to do this. So I'm game. If you find anything or you build anything, please call, okay? Awesome,
will do. Thanks.
I love it. People building a business live on the call.
That'd be the best thing ever. I mean, if Nick actually goes and builds this, and then, I mean, that'd be the most amazing outcome ever. But
we were here when it happened.
I'm kind of losing track of the scroll here.
Phil, the last question I believe we left on is from Shazia. Are there ways to evaluate competitor pricing when they don't advertise it on their websites?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, this happens, I've spent a lot of time in B2B software as a service, and when a B2B software as a service company is selling into middle market or enterprise, it's super common for them not to disclose pricing. And candidly, a thing that happens is talking with people who have at one point been a customer of maybe one of your competitors or another one, and then maybe came over to your offering instead, being very, very keen to find out why they came your way, and having part of that discussion be around the economics. Now, I think it kind of comes off wrong if like the very first question is, what were you paying over there? But getting a sense for, okay, so you came to us from this other competitor, now you're on our service. Tell us about, what was bugging you over there? What caused you to go out and search again? For middle market and enterprise, I think that is one of the very best things that you can do, is have those human conversations where you get kind of color from people that have experienced firsthand some of the competitive offerings. That's at least a starting point. I'm sure there's plenty of other ideas too.
Thanks, Phil. You're getting lots of thank yous and love in the chat. I guess this could be our final question from Matthew, wondering, does this process, is this a question? How does this work from a social media marketing standpoint? We looked at a lot of tools that are looking at company websites, but maybe you can answer how we could use these tools to analyze social media instead.
Yeah, totally. Man, I really wish that we could have gotten through an even deeper digital marketing breakdown, the teardown. There are definitely tools that you can use to crawl social media and to get a sense for what keywords are being heavily used by particular market entrants. I don't have it right at the tip of my fingertips, specific tool recommendations for that, but 100% those tools exist and should be every bit as effective as what we talked about with analyzing things that are available on websites.
Well, Phil, maybe we can do a part 2 to this session and we can do a deep dive
That's
into
awesome. Yeah.
analysis.
As long as Nick is my guest speaker with his new product and company.
I love it. Well, it looks like that was the final question. Thanks so much, everyone, for participating and asking great questions. And of course, thank you so much to Phil for lending your expertise to us on this Friday afternoon. As Phil mentioned, we can share the recording afterwards. And I can also share a link to Polsky's future event, Entrepreneurship Essentials series coming up as well.
Great.
So thank you again for joining. Thank you so much, Phil, for being with us today and sharing your time and expertise. And enjoy the rest of your Friday afternoon, everyone.
Super. Have a great Friday afternoon, everyone. Anyone that wants to stay in touch over time, just connect with me on LinkedIn, mention this talk, and love to stay in touch and hear what you build and how you navigate the competitive landscape. So thank you all.
Thanks, Phil. Have a good day, everyone.